I still remember how excited I was when the idea first came to me. It wasn't anything extravagant or over the top, just a small, thoughtful surprise to show my husband how much he meant to me. We'd been married for a few years, and I thought, why not do something playful, something memorable? I decided to blindfold myself. It might sound silly, I know, but I thought it would add an element of fun. I imagined the anticipation, the way it would make the surprise even more exciting for him. I could already picture his smile, his laughter as he guided me around. The idea of trusting him completely, of letting him lead me into the unknown, felt symbolic in a way. Isn't that what marriage is all about? Trust? So I planned everything down to the smallest detail. I chose the perfect evening, a Friday night when we both had nothing else to do. I cooked his favorite dinner, lit candles in the dining room, and set out a little gift I'd bought for him earlier that week. It wasn't anything grand, just a small token of love, something I thought would make him feel special. As I tied the blindfold around my eyes, I couldn't help but smile. This is going to be perfect, I thought. I called out to him, my voice light and playful, and said, "Okay, I'm ready. Come and guide me." He laughed when he walked into the room, his voice warm and reassuring. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Absolutely," I said, grinning. "Just trust me, and I'll trust you." He took my hand, his grip firm yet gentle, and I felt a surge of excitement. I couldn't see a thing, of course, but that was the whole point. I let him lead me, step by step, my world reduced to the sound of his voice and the feel of his hand in mine. It was thrilling in a way I hadn't expected, this total surrender, this reliance on him to keep me safe. But as we moved through the house, something felt off. It was subtle at first, just a flicker of doubt in the back of my mind. Maybe it was the way he hesitated before answering my questions, or the way his grip tightened ever so slightly when I asked where we were going. Still, I brushed it aside. "Don't overthink it," I told myself. "This is supposed to be fun." Little did I know, the surprise wasn't going to be what I had planned. It was going to be something else entirely. Something I never saw coming. I don't know when exactly it started, this strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. At first, it was just a fleeting thought, easy to dismiss. "You're imagining things," I told myself. But as he guided me through the house, that tiny flicker of doubt grew stronger, harder to ignore. It wasn't anything obvious. It was the little things. His silence when I asked a question, the way he would pause for just a second before responding, as if he were thinking too hard about what to say. Normally, he was so quick with his words, playful and teasing. But tonight, something about his tone felt... "Careful. Where are we going now?" I asked, my voice light, playful, trying to shake off the unease creeping in. "You'll see," he said, his voice warm, but there was a tightness to it, like he was hiding something. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt it in the way he answered, the way his hand rested just a little too firmly on my back. We stopped for a moment, and I heard him move away. My hand reached out instinctively, but he wasn't there anymore. "Where did you go?" I asked, half laughing to hide the sudden nervousness that had crept into my voice. "I'm right here," he said, his voice closer now. "Don't worry." I smiled, trying to shake it off. Of course, he was right. There was nothing to worry about. This was a surprise for him, after all. Maybe I'm just overthinking everything because I can't see. That's what I told myself, anyway. But then there were the sounds, the faint creak of the floorboards, not where I thought he was standing, the soft shuffle of movement, as if someone else was in the room. I froze for a moment, listening, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. "What was that?" I asked, my voice a little sharper than I intended. "What was what?" he replied, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "You're imagining things." Maybe I was. Maybe the blindfold was messing with my senses, making me paranoid. But still, the unease lingered. Something wasn't adding up, but I couldn't figure out what. He took my hand again, and we started moving. "Just a little farther," he said, his voice smooth, calm, as if nothing was wrong. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as we moved through the house, every step felt heavier than the last, like I was walking into something I wasn't prepared for. And then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A quiet, almost imperceptible sound, like a stifled laugh, or maybe a breath. It was faint, but it was there, and it wasn't his. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing. "What was that?" I asked again, this time my voice trembling slightly. Nothing, he said, too quickly, too casually. Just the house settling. But I wasn't so sure anymore. I didn't move. My feet stayed planted where I stood, and my hand gripped his tighter. Something was wrong. Something I couldn't quite put into words, but I felt it deep in my gut. My senses were heightened in the darkness, and every little noise, every pause in his voice, seemed to scream at me that I was missing something. The house settling? I repeated, my voice soft but laced with doubt. It didn't sound like that. He hesitated for just a moment, just long enough for me to notice. You're overthinking this, he said, his tone light, almost teasing, but I caught the edge of something else in it. Nervousness? Guilt? I couldn't tell, but it made my stomach twist. I laughed softly, trying to shake off the tension. You're not messing with me, are you? This isn't one of your pranks? He had always been the playful type, the kind to pull a harmless trick just to see me laugh. Maybe that's all this was. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the better of me. No pranks, he said quickly, too quickly. I promise. But his grip on my hand tightened just slightly, and I felt his pace quicken as he guided me forward. It was subtle, but I noticed it. He wanted me to move, wanted to get past whatever moment had just unsettled us both, and that's when I realized he wasn't just leading me somewhere, he was guiding me away from something. What's going on? I asked, stopping again, my voice firmer this time. Are you hiding something from me? He chuckled, but it didn't feel genuine. You're overthinking it, he said again. Trust me. Everything's fine. Trust him. Those two words rang in my ears, louder than they should have. Of course, I trusted him. He was my husband, the person I'd built my life with. But right now, standing in the dark with only his voice to guide me, I felt an odd sense of distance, like he wasn't fully there with me. The sounds came again, this time closer. A faint rustling like fabric shifting, and then a soft creak, too soft to be the floorboards beneath us. I turned my head instinctively toward the noise, though I couldn't see a thing. What is that? I asked, my voice sharper now. My fingers tightened around his as if holding on to him could somehow anchor me. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he tugged gently on my hand, trying to lead me forward. Come on, he said, his voice steady but strained. We're almost there. But I didn't move. No, I said, my voice trembling now. Not until you tell me what's going on. Who else is here? That question hung heavy in the air between us, and for a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. He didn't respond right away, and that silence, so loud, so suffocating, made my chest tighten. There's no one else, he said finally, his tone quieter now, almost defensive. It's just us. But I didn't believe him. Not anymore. My mind raced, piecing together every odd sound, every hesitation, every subtle shift in his demeanor. I couldn't see what was happening, but I could feel it. Something was wrong, and he wasn't telling me the truth. Take off the blindfold, I said, my voice firmer than I felt. I'm serious. He hesitated again, and that hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of fear and anger rising within me. Whatever was going on, he didn't want me to see it. Take it off, I repeated, my voice shaking now. But he didn't move. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and almost unbearable. My hands trembled as I reached for the blindfold myself. If he wasn't going to take it off, I would. My heart raced, my breath quick and shallow, as the knot slipped loose and the fabric fell away from my eyes. And there he was, standing just a few feet in front of me, his face a mixture of guilt and something else I couldn't quite place. But it wasn't his expression that stopped me cold. It was the scene behind him. The dining room, the one I'd spent hours setting up, looked perfect, just as I'd imagined. Candles flickered softly, casting a warm glow over the table set for two. My gift for him sat neatly in the center, wrapped in the gold paper I'd chosen just that morning. It should have been beautiful, magical even, but something was off. I noticed the movement first, just to the side, barely visible in the flickering candlelight. And then I saw her. A woman, standing in the shadows, her face half hidden but unmistakable. She was looking at him, her eyes wide with something that might have been fear or guilt. And just like that, the pieces clicked into place. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened as I looked between the two of them, searching for some kind of explanation, some shred of reason that would make this make sense. Who is she? I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. I could feel the tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not until I knew the truth. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. His eyes darted to hers, then back to me, and in that moment, I knew. I didn't need him to say it. The look on his face told me everything. She's no one, he said finally, his voice shaky and unconvincing. No one? I repeated, my voice rising now. Then why is she here? Why did I hear her? He stepped toward me, his hands raised as if to calm me down, but I took a step back. I couldn't let him close the distance, not now. Not when the truth was standing right there in front of me. I can explain, he said quickly, his words tumbling over each other. It's not what it looks like. But it was exactly what it looked like. My mind raced, replaying every moment of the evening. The hesitation in his voice, the strange noises, the way he kept trying to rush me forward. He had been hiding her the entire time, and I had been blindfolded, completely in the dark, both literally and figuratively. How long? I asked, my voice trembling now. How long has this been going on? He didn't answer right away, and that silence cut deeper than any words ever could. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, suffocating me. The room seemed to tilt slightly, like I was standing on unsteady ground, and I had to grab the back of a chair to steady myself. You were supposed to trust me, I said, my voice cracking as the tears finally spilled over. I trusted you. He reached for me again, but I shook my head. Don't, I said firmly. Don't touch me. The woman stepped forward then, her voice soft, barely audible. I should go, she said, her eyes avoiding mine. She grabbed her coat from the back of a chair and moved toward the door without another word. He didn't stop her, didn't say anything as she slipped out into the night, but as the door clicked shut behind her, the silence that followed was deafening. I turned back to him, my heart breaking all over again as I looked into the face of the man I thought I knew, the man I thought I could trust. Why? I asked, my voice trembling. Why would you do this to me? He didn't answer, and in that moment, I realized he couldn't. There was no excuse, no explanation, no words that could ever make this right. The silence between us stretched on, heavy and unbearable, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I stood there, staring at him, waiting for him to say something, anything that might make this moment hurt just a little less. But he just looked at me, his lips parted as if he wanted to speak but didn't know how to begin. Say something, I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. You owe me at least that much. He took a step toward me, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender, his voice soft and unsteady. It's not what you think, he said. I didn't plan this. She just showed up. I didn't know what to do. Didn't know what to do, I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. You could have told me. You could have stopped this before it even started. Instead, you blindfolded me and led me through this house, knowing she was here the whole time. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes. But it wasn't enough. Not this time. I didn't want to hurt you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unfamiliar. Well, congratulations, I said. You've outdone yourself. He reached for my hand again, but I pulled back, wrapping my arms around myself as if to shield against the weight of his betrayal. I felt like the room was spinning, like the ground beneath me was crumbling, and I was fighting to stay upright. How could this have happened? How could the man I trusted with everything have done this to me? I need you to tell me the truth, I said finally, my voice breaking. How long has this been going on? Is she someone from your past? Someone you've been seeing behind my back? He hesitated, and that hesitation was like a knife twisting in my chest. It's not like that, he said. She's an old friend. She needed help, and I didn't want to turn her away. Help? I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. You let her into our home. You let her stand there watching me while you pretended nothing was wrong. Do you even realize what that looks like? I wasn't thinking, he admitted, his voice cracking. I was trying to handle the situation, but I handled it wrong. I see that now. Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand to silence him. Just stop. Do you honestly expect me to believe that this was some innocent mistake? That she just happened to show up out of the blue and you had no idea what to do? Because right now, it looks like you've been lying to me." He opened his mouth to protest, but I didn't let him. "You could have told me," I continued, my voice rising with every word. "From the moment she showed up, you could have been honest with me, but instead, you blindfolded me. You turned this into a game, like my trust was something you could play with." Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not while I was still standing in front of him, demanding answers he didn't seem willing to give. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I asked, my voice cracking. "You've made me question everything. Every moment, every word, every promise you ever made to me. How am I supposed to trust you after this?" His face crumpled, and for a moment I thought he might cry. But instead, he took a deep breath and said the one thing I didn't want to hear. "I made a mistake," he said. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I didn't know how to handle it." I stared at him, my heart breaking all over again. "A mistake?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Is that all this is to you? A mistake?" He didn't answer, and in that silence I felt something inside me shift. The anger and hurt were still there, but beneath them, a quiet resolve was beginning to take root. I realized that, whatever his reasons, whatever his excuses, nothing he said could undo what had already been done. "You need to leave," I said finally, my voice steady despite the tears streaming down my face. "I can't look at you right now. I can't even think straight." He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "You don't mean that," he said. "We can talk this through. We can fix this." But I shook my head. "I need space," I said firmly. "I need time to figure out what this means, what we mean. But right now I can't do that with you here." He hesitated as if he wanted to argue, but then he nodded. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll go. But please, don't give up on us. Not yet." I didn't respond. I couldn't. As he turned and walked toward the door, the sound of it closing behind him echoed in the silence, and I finally let the tears fall. The silence after he left was deafening, heavy like a weight pressing down on my chest. For a long time I just stood there, frozen, staring at the door as if he might walk back through it. But he didn't. And for the first time, I didn't know if I wanted him to. The house felt too big, too empty without him. Every flicker of the candles, every shadow in the room seemed to mock me, reminding me of the scene that had just unfolded. The image of her standing there, so calm, so unapologetic, was burned into my mind. And the way he looked at me, his face full of excuses but empty of answers, played on repeat like a haunting melody I couldn't escape. I finally sank into a chair, my body too heavy to hold itself up anymore. My hands trembled as I reached for the glass of water I'd left on the table, but I couldn't bring myself to drink it. Everything felt wrong, tainted somehow, like I couldn't trust even the smallest, most ordinary things. The questions came then, flooding my mind in a relentless tide. Who was she really? Why was she here? How long had this been going on? Was he telling me the truth? And then the question that hurt the most. Was I the fool for not seeing it sooner? I thought back to all the moments I'd brushed off, all the times I'd ignored the little things that didn't quite add up. The late nights at work, the sudden phone calls he took in another room, the vague answers when I asked him what was on his mind. At the time, I'd chalked it up to stress, to the natural ebb and flow of a relationship. But now, with the blindfold off, literally and figuratively, it was hard not to see those moments in a different light. Had I been blind to the truth all along? Or had I chosen not to see it? I sat there for what felt like hours, my thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm. The candles burned lower, their soft glow dimming, and the house grew darker around me. I thought about calling someone, a friend, a family member, but the idea of explaining what had just happened felt impossible. How could I put into words the betrayal, the humiliation, the weight of everything I was feeling? Eventually, I got up and started blowing out the candles one by one. With each flicker of light extinguished, I felt a strange kind of release, as if I was slowly letting go of the illusion I'd worked so hard to create. The perfect dinner, the thoughtful gift, the romantic gesture, it had all been for nothing. And yet there was something almost cathartic about tearing it all down. By the time the last candle went out, the house was dark and silent. I stood there in the shadows, my arms wrapped around myself, and for the first time I allowed myself to cry. Not the quiet, controlled tears I'd shed earlier, but deep, guttural sobs that shook my entire body. It wasn't just about him or her or even the events of the night. It was about everything I thought we had, everything I thought we were, and the realization that it might have all been a lie. When the tears finally stopped, I felt hollow, like there was nothing left inside me. But somewhere in that emptiness, a tiny spark began to flicker. A spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger, or sadness, or even hope. It was resolve. I didn't know what the future held, or what this meant for us, but I knew one thing. I couldn't keep pretending everything was okay. I couldn't keep blindfolding myself to the truth. Whatever happened next, I had to face it head-on, with my eyes wide open. The next morning came too quickly, the light of day stark and unkind as it filtered through the curtains. I woke with a heaviness in my chest, the memories of the night before crashing over me like a wave. For a moment I thought about staying in bed, hiding from the world, but I knew I couldn't. Not now. I forced myself up and into the shower, letting the hot water wash over me as if it could somehow rinse away the confusion, the betrayal, the ache in my heart. But no matter how long I stood there, the questions remained. What am I supposed to do now? Can we fix this? Should I even want to? I made coffee, though I wasn't hungry. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the untouched cup in front of me, replaying the scene over and over. The sound of her voice, the look on his face, the way he'd tried to dismiss everything as though it were nothing. It all felt surreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. But it wasn't a dream. It was my reality now. The sound of my phone vibrating pulled me out of my thoughts. I glanced at it and saw his name on the screen. My stomach twisted. I didn't answer. Instead, I let it ring, the buzzing against the table filling the silence of the room. When it finally stopped, I picked it up and stared at the missed call, followed by a new message. Can we talk? Please. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, wanted to scream, but I didn't. Instead, I sat there, staring at the screen, my mind racing. What was there to talk about? He'd made his choices. He'd shown me exactly where I stood, hadn't he? And yet, part of me craved answers, needed them, even if I knew they wouldn't fix anything. After what felt like hours, I finally typed a response. Come by later, we need to talk. As I hit send, my hands shook. I didn't know what I was going to say, or even what I wanted to hear from him. All I knew was that I couldn't move forward without facing this head-on. When he arrived that evening, I was already sitting in the living room, waiting. The house was quiet, the air heavy with unspoken words. He walked in slowly, cautiously, like he was afraid of what he might find. Hi, he said softly, standing just inside the doorway. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, trying to read his face, trying to see something, anything that might tell me what he was thinking. But all I saw was guilt, plain and simple. Sit, I said finally, gesturing to the chair across from me. He obeyed, lowering himself into the seat like a man about to face a firing squad. For a moment, neither of us said anything, the silence between us louder than any words could have been. Then, finally, I spoke. I need you to tell me the truth, I said, my voice calm but firm. All of it. No excuses, no half-truths. Just tell me what's going on. He nodded, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Okay, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I owe you that. He started to speak, haltingly at first, then faster as the words poured out. He told me about her, how they'd known each other years ago, before he and I had met. How she'd reached out to him recently, claiming she was in trouble and needed someone to talk to. He swore he hadn't planned for her to be here last night, that she'd shown up unannounced, and he hadn't known how to handle it. I didn't want to hurt you, he said, his voice breaking. I was trying to protect you, to keep you from worrying, but I see now that I handled it all wrong. I listened in silence, my emotions swirling. Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to accept his explanation and move on. But another part of me, the part that had spent the night questioning everything, wasn't so sure. And the blindfold? I asked, my voice sharp. Was that your way of keeping me in the dark, literally? He shook his head, his face crumpling. No, he said quickly. That was your idea. I thought it would make things easier. I don't know what I thought. Didn't think at all, I said, my voice rising. You didn't think about how this would make me feel, how humiliating it would be to find out you were hiding something from me in my own home. He looked away, unable to meet my eyes, and in that moment, I realized the truth. He didn't have a good reason for what he'd done. He didn't have an excuse that could make any of this better. "I don't know if I can trust you anymore," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "And without trust, what's left?" His head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. "Please," he said, his voice desperate. "Don't say that. We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." But as I looked at him, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. I realized that no matter what he said, no matter what promises he made, something between us had broken. And I didn't know if it could ever be put back together. The room was quiet again, his words still hanging in the air. "We can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." Once, I might have believed him, might have clung to those words like a lifeline. But now, they felt hollow, like an echo of promises that had already been broken. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms as I looked at him. His face was pale, his shoulders slumped, as if he already knew what I was going to say. And maybe he did. Maybe we both knew this moment was inevitable. "You say you'll do whatever it takes," I said finally, my voice steady but cold. "But do you even know what that means? Do you even understand what you've done?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I held up a hand to stop him. "No," I said firmly. "You don't. Because if you did, you wouldn't have put me in this position in the first place. You wouldn't have lied to me. You wouldn't have blindfolded me and led me through this house like some fool while you hid her right under my nose." "I didn't lie," he said, his voice soft, almost pleading. I didn't tell you the whole truth." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "That's the same thing, and you know it." He looked down at his hands, his fingers twisting together in his lap. "I know I messed up," he said quietly. "I know I hurt you. But I swear, it wasn't what it looked like. She doesn't mean anything to me. You're the one I love." "I need space," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "I need time to figure out what I want, what we both want. Right now, I can't look at you without feeling this ache in my chest, and I don't think that's fair to either of us." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, not because they were comforting, but because they felt so utterly meaningless. Love? Was this what love was supposed to feel like? Betrayal, doubt, humiliation? "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You say you love me, but love doesn't do this. Love doesn't hide. Love doesn't make someone feel like they're in the dark, questioning everything they thought they knew." He looked up at me then, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. "I'll prove it to you," he said. "I'll show you that I'm sorry, that you can trust me again." But I shook my head. "You can't just fix this with words or promises," I said. "Trust isn't something you can snap your fingers and rebuild. It's something you earn, piece by piece, over time. And right now, I don't know if I can give you that chance." The silence between us was suffocating, the weight of my words settling over both of us like a heavy fog. I could see the desperation in his eyes, the way he was clinging to the hope that I might forgive him, that we might be able to move past this. But in my heart, I knew it wasn't that simple. "I need space," I said finally, my voice soft but firm. "I need time to figure out what I want, what we both want. Right now, I can't look at you without feeling this ache in my chest, and I don't think that's fair to either of us." His face fell, and for a moment I thought he might argue. But then he nodded, his shoulders slumping in defeat. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll give you space, but please, don't give up on us. Not yet." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. As he stood and walked to the door, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger, and something else I couldn't quite name. When the door closed behind him, I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had just been. Epilogue. Moving forward. Over the next few days, I gave myself the space I'd asked for, letting the reality of what had happened sink in. The pain was still there, raw and aching, but so was something else. Clarity. I knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep blindfolding myself to the truth. Maybe we could fix things. Maybe we couldn't. But for the first time in a long time, I knew one thing for certain. I needed to choose myself first.